Welcome to the podcast, Quark and Roll. I am your host, Quark Hui Lan. Today, I'm going to have a conversation with Yenny Delgado, who is a Peruvian psychologist and theologian. She is a scholar of native descent and founded Publica Theology, and she promotes dialogue that elevates women's voices and encourages theological reflection from womanist and feminist decolonial perspectives. In this episode, you will learn something about Native American women doing theology, as well as how she combines psychology with theology. Welcome to the podcast. Can you share with us why did you found Publica Theology and what is its mission?
Basically, Publica is a space of women can publish their work, also amplify the voices of women in the theological sphere, how we bring our reflections and essays and approach to how women do theology. I started and founded theology in 2020, and it's almost 6 years where we create also archive of women voices who have also a channel in YouTube. And this is our mission, amplify women voices in the theological sphere.
So do you have contributors writing for this particular website or doing the podcast?
Yes, we have published articles. Also, we have a channel on YouTube who is part of these resources that also women can learn from. It's basically in Spanish, and that brings important voices because most of the resources are in English. And we see that the need of publishing in Spanish and also recorded in Spanish to theologians who have a fear language and not really feel confident to present in English right now. I see as all the resources as a part of the language barrier that we find many theologians are deal with.
What is Abya Yala theology and how is it different from Latin American theology?
Abya Yala theology coming for the language of the Guna language, who means land and full maturity, a land of bitter blood. For some people who never hear, Abya Yala is the whole continent. Some people call it the Americas, from Chile, Argentina to Alaska. It's 35 countries in the whole continent, and we see how have been divided for political reasons and how the existence of Native people also been in risk in the last year. Abya Yala is a common name for us who wanted to do decolonization work. We started with name our motherland with a native language. From there, we decided to start to doing theology who bring wisdom, ancestral memories alive with what is our theological thinking about what we are doing in Abya Yala. The difference with Latin American theology is we started with native spiritualities practices as a base of compatibility with Christianity. We decided to mention that not only the poor or the impoverished, but also the native people are the ones who struggle most from the beginning of colonization and genocide and slavery in Abya Yala. Something that we see is missing from Latin American theologians who don't even mention native people, maybe as an object of analysis, but not as a subject, as a basis resources of we can do theology also and recognize as theology and not only as practices, because we see the Western education try to simplify the native people ancestry and spirituality practices as something inferior and no knowledge as a principle of analysis. This is why we take basically a different approach, and we are trying to build Abya Yala theology as a process of as communal, as prophetic, political approach of what we are doing right now with not only me, but so many other theologians who wanted to be part of this community work. I think this is part of what we gathered a few weeks ago in Guatemala, and gathering with almost 400 people. And not only theologians, but educators, farmers, politicians. I think that is the kind of movement that Abya Yala theology want to bring back to the communities, not only in the space of academy or seminaries or universities, but bring back to the community, because we are learning from there and we are in relationship with the community too.
Can you tell us about the conference in Guatemala that 400 people attended? What were the themes and what did the people talk about?
In the beginning of November, we have a meeting in first gathering where we bring almost participants of 10 countries of Abya Yala, and we gathering for 3.5 days. And during the conference, we had tables of work in groups about the participation of the church, also women's perspective from a womanist perspective, a feminist perspective, also how the community is part of the life of the church, and also a very political movement, because are fighting for the right of existence in many, many countries, yet is not recognized that it's a pluridiverse community, so plurinations. Like in Peru, we are 52 recognized languages, or native languages, but still the government not recognize the existence of nations inside of Peru, because they see the republics are one nation, one country. And then we was examining how was the past of the history of how Christianity arrived, or the Christendom arrived with the European empires, how we can approach of decolonization after 500 years, being subject of abuse, oppression, and also forced to being Christianized. A lot of people still struggle with to identify as a native or native descendants, like myself, and be Christians, because they think it's not possible. In order to be Christian, you need to leave your spiritual practice behind. That was the message in the beginning of colonization. And people still struggle today to recognize their identity and how they can live their native practices without contradiction. Being Christian is also, in Abya Yala, need to also recognize the spiritual practices of native people who are the memories of ancestors for hundreds or thousands of years. I think that construction of focus groups, and also we have panels and main speakers who participate in the gathering, bring us the first also statement that 400 people signed in. We counting not only women, men, but children who participate. Was in a rural area and community of farmers in Mazatenango, Guatemala. And that statement brings us life. Theology is not only communal, it's prophetic, it's political, it's ancestral. We really grateful for the opportunity to gather and show that as a theologians, we are part of the movement, and the social movement as a community of faith alive, and they can be part of also the big table when we are thinking in our decolonization work that we are doing today.
There has been talked about solidarity among native peoples. Can you share your views about Palestinians and Gaza from your native perspective?
From the gathering and before, native people recognized the right to exist and the right to also be recognized for the state. The recognition of native people in all areas who was colonized, or regions who was colonized for the Europeans. And this is when we see the struggle for Palestinians as a native people who want to have the right to exist, have the right to participate in the government, to organize, to be farmers in their own ancestral land. Native people feel close to and feel like we also struggle for the same thing here, and we feel in relationship with Palestinians. The struggle of these years, people of Gaza suffering genocide and the children suffering, the women suffering. We know what really means. This is why we, in the gathering, we have the Palestinian flag on the front of the stage. We have prayers for the Palestinian people, and we request also the freedom of Palestinian people who been hostage, being really criminalized for the Israeli government. Right now, we are very commitment. We talk about the Palestinian reality struggle because we are close to the same issues with more oppressive, dictatorial, and also right-wing governments who are rising in different territories of Abya Yala.
You are also trained as a psychologist. Can you share with us how you combine psychology with theology in your own work?
Yes, there's two disciplines that I passion for. I really love the psychological approach of my work and also theological approach of my reflections. For that reason, I'm doing a PhD in psychology of religion in University of Lausanne. Bring me the opportunity to analyze a group of participants who use spiritual and religious aspects in the construction of the psychological identity. Why is important is because the complexity of identity for Native people who identify as a Native and as a Christian, how they deal with the understanding of these two big, not only cognitive or not only practices, but also affective and very emotional for some people to bring these two and embody these two realities. That is important. I think from the psychological perspective, it's a lot that we can understand. And as a theologian, that helped me to also reflect in how God can be part of this process, people who really in need. Also, the process of genocide, abuse, and oppression, the Native people struggle. We've been attacked, but also traumatized for so many experiences. We know from the psychological perspective that all these traumas go through generation to generation if it's not healed, because it's not magical heal if we don't talk about it. It means I carry out the trauma not only of my mom, but my grandmother, my great-grandmother, and still today we don't understand exactly what happened in the past. But now the psychology resources that we have can help us to recognize that genocide and colonization was a traumatic event, not only a historical event, but a personal event, a communal event that individuals are suffering today. And that helped me with my resources and studies to have a better approach in writing. This is what I do more, writing how heal or traumas and wounds for the past, how we can approach our participation in different oppression too. And for some people also struggle with the historical event of slavery, so for Native people, but also for Africans, descendants. I think all these approaches need to be also psychological and help me to have a better understanding as a theologian who using psychological tools for this process. I think that part of my work. Also, even for organize the gathering in Guatemala, we are organizing another one for next September 2026. We are using all these resources to have a better gatherings and tables of work and how we also celebrate the life together. I think that healing process is in community. It's not only individual or by ourselves, but every encounter. And we have the pressures of we want to celebrate together. We are here.
You said that you are studying for your doctorate at the University of Lausanne. What is your dissertation or research about?
Yes, in the last 5 years, I've been studying the development and the construction of psychological identity. I studied two groups, one who are self-identified as a Native people, have Native ancestors, also think that they are Christianity is compatible with an native spirituality and also practice native spirituality in community. In the same time, we have another group of study who are Spanish speakers who don't have native ancestor and not identify as a native, who is also part of the reality of colonization. A lot of Europeans arrive and don't have any approach with native people in their own families. That two groups are part of my analysis. I use in theory of constellation, is 5 dimensions of the psychological perspective or construction of identity using religious and spiritual practices. I just in chapter 9, close to finish of 11 chapters, that will be part of a future book, because part 1 is the Christianization of Abya Yala. I started with a history of why the impact of identity or crisis in our psychological identity coming from the basic historical approach of colonization. And people think it's 500 years ago, nothing to do with us today in 2025, but the truth is it's a big part of the life of people today. And then from there, I really encounter how that historical event affected the life of Native people today and how we can healing. And that approach is in my research coming soon.
Yes, congratulations that your work is almost done. And what are your hopes for 2026?
For me is today be in this space can bring more hope to people also who struggle with their own identities. They wanted to go to a deep understanding of God in the middle of this historical past. I think that is my hope. They give me also the faith on the resurrection. For many, many years, we are living in the crucifixion and the pain and the oppression, but now we can see the resurrection. I think that is an important hope for 2026 and for all the people who are looking for a community of faith, who are struggling for understanding native spirituality. I think we are more people who wanted to open spaces that encounter, celebrate it, and live a real spirituality, who are really past of our native people and also our grandparents alive. I think that is my hope for 2026. And I hope to see Gaza free of attacks, released, and they can live good living in their native land.
What will be your wish or advice for the upcoming generation of leaders?
My advice will be don't lose hope. I think we are in the approach of getting more real with what we are looking for. I think talking about our struggles in community and if it's via Zoom or via social media or in person, I think that is my hope for young generations. We can see it's a long path. We know it started today. So many amazing theologian people who in the past opened this conversation to have the opportunity today to continue. I think also the technology who are bringing us together. Just last week, we have a gathering of more than 30 people for 12 different countries in Abya Yala, celebrating life and women voices in the theological communities. I think that brings me a lot of energy, emotion, very passionate. I think new generation can find out the places that can feel that also in their own communities.
Thank you very much for joining the podcast today. If you find this podcast helpful to you, please click like, comment, and subscribe. I will see you in the next episode.